Amen, Sinus. Hello, good evening.
I greet you. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to see you in good health. I welcome our esteemed audience from my hometown, Baku. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Mr. Sinus, we talk with you every week. You analyze all the geopolitical trends, processes, agreements, meetings. Last week we didn't meet with you. Haven't met. And why? Because you are a political scientist, as I mentioned, from the United States of America, but today you are not there. Today you are in your hometown, I understand, right?
Yes, I flew to Azerbaijan last week. I was invited to an international conference which was organized by the Azerbaijan Diplomatic Academy. This is the most prestigious Azerbaijani university in the field of foreign policy, headed by a well-known diplomat, the first and ambassador of Azerbaijan to the United States of America, Professor Hafiz Pakraev. And this is already not the first such conference, but I am participating in it for the first time. Representatives from 44 countries, former diplomats, representatives of think tanks, analytical centers, former high-ranking officials. About 80 people attended. And this took place for the first time in two cities. It first started in Kankendi, which, as you know, has returned. Finally, after a long occupation, to the legal domain of Azerbaijan, after the complete liberation of Karabakh from years of Armenian occupation. And I was fortunate last year to participate in a media forum in the city of Shusha. And now I took part in this conference with the participation of political scientists in Kankendi, and then in the capital of Azerbaijan, in the city of Baku. As before, this was a wonderful opportunity to interact with representatives of think tanks, political scientists, and high-ranking officials, professionals in their field from different countries, and most importantly, just like last time in Shusha and now, it was a very good opportunity to personally interact with the president of Azerbaijan, with whom everyone had the chance to converse, ask their questions, and receive answers from a politician of such a high level with extensive experience. The president of Azerbaijan, as you know, has been in this position for more than 20 years, and he has had the opportunity to interact with two Republican presidents and two Democratic presidents. Therefore, I am not even mentioning the many high-ranking officials from Europe, the post-Soviet space, and representatives from the global south. Everyone was interested in his opinion on various issues that representatives from these regions, these geographies who were present at the conference had. Standing apart, of course, was the Russian-Ukrainian war, the topic of Iran, the Middle East, the relations between Turkey and Israel, the role of Azerbaijan, the Armenian-Azerbaijani issues, the South Caucasus, the confrontation between the United States of America and China, the change of power in the White House, the policy of the new administration in the USA, tariffs, and everything else. And so the construction of a new world order, which right now we are all witnessing this historical process. All of this was at this international conference. And for me, as someone who works in the field of international politics, it was very important to participate in it, to communicate with all the participants, as well as to talk with the president of Azerbaijan, to ask him my question and to hear his answer. And there a lot was said on the Russian-Ukrainian topic. And as far as I can see, in recent days, a huge amount of analytical discussions have emerged around the speech of the president of Azerbaijan, both within Azerbaijan and abroad. His response to the question, both to my question and to the questions of representatives from other countries who were interested in his stance on the Russian-Ukrainian topic, his response to the fact that when he said that he has no doubt that Ukraine will never agree to recognizing all the occupied territories as a part of Russia. Otherwise, as he said, it means I don't understand something about big politics. Just as he said that Russia, since it has included this in its constitution, will also not take a step back. And the opinion of the president of Azerbaijan was clear that in such matters, counting on this issue being resolved by political means would be the height of naivety. In such matters, it is very important to understand that one side must capitulate. And he gave the example of the Azerbaijani-Armenian War, this confrontation of two wars, the First Karabakh War, the Second Karabakh War, when only thanks to Azerbaijan's victory. After the 44-day war of the Second Karabakh War and the capitulation of Armenia, which occurred on the night of November 9th, 2020. And finally, when the Azerbaijani flag was raised in Kankendi. This happened just over a year ago, and full sovereignty and territorial integrity were restored. And as you can see, the peace process has already begun after this, which Azerbaijan, once again, from a position of strength, using both carrot and stick, has already achieved that Armenia has recognized 17 points. And the remaining 2 points will also, I have no doubt, be recognized because Armenia capitulated and Azerbaijan is the stronger side if we draw parallels with the Russian-Ukrainian war. The president of Azerbaijan also said that today we see a stalemate in this issue. Neither. Russia can achieve great success. Everyone understands that Russia will not win this war, and Ukraine has preserved its statehood. The question is simply about the occupied territories. And today, Ukraine, at the level of the assistance provided by the West, cannot reclaim either Crimea or Donbass. Therefore, the simple question is, on whose side will the United States of America and the collective West be? To be continued. That is, one of the sides must capitulate, either Russia or Ukraine. And if this does not happen, then to say that the war will end would be the height of naivety. But there is a possibility that the conflict could be frozen, as it was, for example, in 1994, under the pressure of the same Russia, which had this military power, and it demonstrated this. The Bishkek Protocol was signed in 1994, but at that time, there was no recognition from Azerbaijan of either Karabakh or the occupied regions under the mandate of the same Armenia, which allowed Azerbaijan to prepare. And so when the necessary situation arose, when Azerbaijan had prepared both its army and found the necessary allies, Azerbaijan regained everything that had been occupied after the First Karabakh War. Today, in order for the conflict to be frozen, that is at the level of confrontation where the troops are currently located, someone needs to demonstrate strength. This strength, of course, can be demonstrated today by the United States of America and their allies in Europe if they act together. But so far, we do not see this political will. We only see that the current US administration is trying to act as a mediator. But as you can see, this does not yield any concrete results. Therefore, the disarray in the position of the West, I mean the United States of America and Europe, is evident there. Russia tries to play on this contradiction. And thus the goals and objectives of the US and Russia differ. I am not even mentioning the position of Ukraine itself. And therefore, we do not see any result in 24 hours or a month, nor any deadline set by Donald Trump. And so rhetoric is rhetoric, but everyone is waiting for the moment when the United States of America and Donald Trump personally must understand that it's time to make some decision in this situation. It is necessary to show political will, and if needed, strength. I think the meetings currently taking place in Paris are clear evidence of this. Now from the European side, representatives also seem to have already become involved in this. Although, as you remember, it was always said, and Russia always stated that Europeans have no business there. The Ukrainians, on the contrary, insisted on it. And the fact that today 3 national security aides, 3 advisors from the UK, Germany and France are also participating there. And all the direct participants in the negotiations between the USA, Russia and Ukraine are taking part there. This says a lot, as if today is the moment. Positions are being aligned after the last 3rd meeting of Special Representative Steve Witkoff. with the Russian president and the Russian delegation. And I think in the near future, we will see some clear outlines of what all these negotiations have led to. The deadline for rhetoric, I think, is over, and Donald Trump and his team understand this perfectly. So let's wait a little for that. Well, I just answered this question on such a large scale because everything that happened at this conference, for the participants I was with, of course, the Russian-Ukrainian theme ran like a red thread through it, because a new world order which is being formed today is impossible without resolving this issue. I can also say that they discussed the topic of Iran and the topic of Turkey, Israel, Middle Eastern issues, the South Caucasus, Armenian, Azerbaijani questions. So if any of these, any questions might interest you, you can ask them. But overall, the conference was very eventful, and this is very important to participate in them. And so that you, for example, dear Ukrainians, do not think that today in the world, sometimes you look at your problem through the prism of Ukrainocentrism and all the news happening in the world, you perceive it the same way. The world is much broader, and in the world, of course, there are a huge number of such problems that are proceeding in their own way. And not simply more, if these matters involve the main key countries, such as the United States of America, China, and Europe, which are within the main economy, so to speak, and Ukraine, due to its geography, intersects with the interests of many of these countries, not to mention Russia, among others. So it's important to understand what geopolitical processes are occurring and what position each country holds in order to behave very correctly in this situation. Well, as far as I understand, the Ukrainian delegation, Ukrainian foreign policy marketing, today seems to be working much better than it did before the start of this full-scale aggression. And here, one should not think that everything today depends only on the United States and the will of Donald Trump. And in this situation, I think Ukraine is behaving seemingly very correctly so far, not relying solely on, so to speak, this American line. One just needs to understand what game Russia, China, Europe, and the United States are playing in order to find the right willing coalitions to be truly confident about who can support you, whether with money, military, technical equipment, or actual troops, and to understand that even if the United States, due to a change in administration, will play some game that doesn't suit Ukraine, to understand that this doesn't mean you can't play your own part in this situation. Therefore, as far as I understand, this advice was also given by the president of Azerbaijan when he was asked about the Russian and Ukrainian topics. I can only support him because everything that is happening today indicates that Ukraine has all the opportunities for this, to understand that these negotiations, as Donald Trump, for example, wants, will not lead to a specific goal, a specific result. The most that can happen is a freezing of the conflict. Therefore, you must understand the war will continue. And even if there is a freezing of the conflict, you will need to prepare for the fact that sooner or later this war may repeat itself, as far as I understand. So far, the security guarantees that Ukraine needs at the level that can stop Russia from a future war, no one is providing yet. So this process is not simple, it's complex. And there's absolutely no need to cover your head with ashes either, of necessity, because the difference in positions between Europe and the United States is evident. Europe is situational as if with China. It can find many common positions. Therefore, you just need to play this wisely and understand that the information attack you hear from morning till night, which is happening, even if we don't like what this Steve Witkoff says, sometimes he talks complete nonsense. It doesn't mean that this is how it should be. Strength must be met with strength, both military on the ground and informational, political, ideological. It's simply a process in which you need to participate. You need to play this game. And all of this was mentioned precisely at this conference. And the president of Azerbaijan shared his experience very candidly. And It's no coincidence that the Ukrainian political leadership always listens to him attentively, which I also advise you to do. Sorry for talking about all this for so long, but it's all directly connected, a red thread through the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Thank you very much for this stream. Thank you for taking the time from your native Azerbaijan, from Baku, to join us and, let's say, to analyze in an emergency mode what is happening in the world right now. First and foremost, we were, of course, interested in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the kind words, dear. Igor, I'm just taking advantage of being in Azerbaijan, and I participated in this very important international conference. And what I felt there, the ongoing processes, the relations of representatives from different countries, they all view things differently because each country looks through the prism of its own interests. And I consider it very important to share with you, dear Ukrainians, what I have learned from this whole situation. It was evident that all representatives understand that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when a unipolar world emerged by default and it was not formalized, either legally or in practical terms, this train was rolling down a slope like this, and today it has hit a dead end. And the whole problem was that this left liberal ideology, which came from the West, it became very strongly established on the European continent. And it was passed on, so to speak, to be cultivated in the post-Soviet space. I remind you that this was a deal, an agreement between the West, led by Bill Clinton, and they delegated this left liberal ideology to Boris Yeltsin in the Kremlin, and it spread across the entire post-Soviet space. It was in my native Azerbaijan, it was in Armenia, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Ukraine, even in Belarus it was present. The same Alexander Lukashenko came to power in fair elections, as you remember, 30 years ago. So all of this sounded beautiful back then. Freedom of speech, sovereignty, human rights, territorial integrity. In other words, here it is, freedom falling from the sky. Well, slowly but surely, we all started to take off these rose-colored glasses. And this was the central theme, the leitmotif of the Azerbaijani president's speech when he was answering all these questions. I too asked him this question. I was also interested in this because being in the government 35 years ago, when I went myself, just like many in the post-Soviet space, representatives of my generation, we believed in all these values, in all these causes. So why did this fiasco occur? And imagine if this fiasco happened not only with us, it also happened from where it originated. Because the arrival of Donald Trump, the fact that half of America voted for him, 77 million, imagine, that's enormous, the size of the population. And we saw what this fiasco led to within the United States of America. If, for example, in Azerbaijan, USAID, Voice of America, Radio Liberty, they were all shut down before Donald Trump came. And when Azerbaijan was accused of violating all these freedoms and rights in Azerbaijan, so today, all of this was shut down by Donald Trump, who represents the country, the government that funds all these structures and accuses them of crimes. Do you understand? If this was criminal, it was for these 35 years, because the criminality of this theme, lies in what? Not in the fact that it sounds beautiful. It sounds beautiful. People believed in it. You didn't fit into these values that you yourself cultivated in this territory. You didn't stand up to defend them. And those people who went to the embrasures, I am one of them. You understand? All right, I suffered. That's on a personal level. And all right, Mikhail Saakashvili suffered on a personal level because of this, and today he continues to suffer because of it, sitting in prison. And no one cares about his fate. No one stands up for him. But look at how much blood has been shed along the entire perimeter of the Russian border. Yeltsin, who was, so to speak, the mouthpiece, yes, of all this left liberal ideology. Imagine how much blood he shed along the perimeter. In Karabakh, in Transnistria, in Abkhazia, in the Tskhin Valley region. All of this happened under Bali Yeltsin. And what was the attitude towards him in the West? It was exactly the same attitude towards Armenia, which was considered the aggressor in this context. We were called aggressors in 1992. The 907th Amendment of the US Congress was adopted against us. So you see, Back then, the foundation started of this hypocrisy, criminality, this left liberal ideology. If you talk about this, then you must be honest. Aggressors should be called aggressors. Victims should be called victims. And they continue this policy to this day regarding you as well. Now you are outraged. Why don't they speak like this? Why don't they call things by their names? And why aren't you supported in the same way since 2014? But this started 35 years ago, betraying. And I, for instance, was young and didn't understand much of this yet, just like my colleagues in the government and the National Liberation Movement. But when I emigrated to the United States of America, and in 2008, suddenly we saw this after the 5-day war of Russia against Georgia. Back then it was Mikhail Saakashvili. What did Mikhail Saakashvili do? Georgia. In matters of Euro integration, no one in the post-Soviet space did this. You Ukrainians didn't even do this. And when you amended your constitution in 2014, what did you get for it? You got the annexation of Crimea and the slaughter in Donbass, and no one stood up for you. And again, after Clinton, who continued this left liberal ideology? Who started this policy of appeasing the aggressor? Biden and Obama, and went for a reset. And as a result, we got this full-scale war the last 3 years and the continuation of this entire policy. And that's why, of course, this kettle of discontent boiled over. Donald Trump came from the United States of America. If Donald Trump hadn't come, another Donald Trump would have. It was a social demand. That's what I heard at this conference. And it is indeed true. Let someone come out today and say that it's not true. And note, now here's the summary of dear benefits. Azerbaijan, which believed in this, in the left liberal ideology, lost Karabakh and 20% of its territory, 7 occupied districts around Karabakh and almost 1 million refugees. Georgia lost Abkhazia, the Tkhin Valley region. Moldova lost Transnistria. You lost Crimea and Donbass. And not for Azerbaijan, nor for Georgia, nor for Moldova, nor for Ukraine. This left liberal Western political machine did not fit in. Now, Azerbaijan was the first among all post-Soviet republics to draw the appropriate conclusions and reject this ideology. Today, Azerbaijan is not pro-Russian, not pro-Iranian, not pro-Chinese, not pro-Western. It is pro-Azerbaijani. This was deciphered at this conference, among others. We are equally distanced from all of them. We do not trust any of them. We are guided by our national interests. We are directly guided by what is in this geography, finding our allies on the ground who are truly ready to stand up for us. These are Turkey, nuclear Pakistan, and Israel. That's everything Azerbaijan has done. As a result, they have continued to pressure us all these years. Who? These are the representatives of this left liberal ideology. We did not listen to them. The latest ones who pressured us very strongly, it was the Biden administration. And it was precisely during this Biden administration that Azerbaijan fully restored its sovereignty and territorial integrity. The moral conclusion from this, in summary, the end justifies the means, meaning this is a criminal ideology as a result of which we all lost, so to speak, sovereignty and territorial integrity, including you. It led us all to a dead end. We rejected this ideology and took a different path. As a result, we achieved full sovereignty and territorial integrity, because when we talk about all these beautiful words, without sovereignty and territorial integrity, no democracy, freedom of speech, human rights, or anything else is possible. Filkin's letter. It applies to some, but not to others. Notice it doesn't apply at all to the post-Soviet space. A missile accidentally flies in somewhere in Poland, in Romania, then they somehow react. But all of this should be in the post-Soviet space. And this post-Soviet space is a zone of strategic interest for Russia. And with Russia, as you can see, they do things behind all our backs. They always try to make agreements. This needs to be understood. And when this understanding came to Georgia today, notice Georgia starts to be destabilized. And a question on this topic was also asked to the president of Azerbaijan. And he clearly stated that Azerbaijan will not let Georgia be harmed, because today Azerbaijan, together with Georgia and Turkey, are in a strategic partnership. The entrance to the South Caucasus is Azerbaijan, and the exit today is Georgia. And those who are attacking Georgia today, who want to destabilize the situation in Georgia from within, are these very representatives of the left liberal ideology. This needs to be understood. And why is Georgia in such a situation today? Because after 2008, Georgia understands that Russia is on its feet. They are afraid of Russia. And the West did not stand up for them in 2008, and they see what is happening today on the Russian-Ukrainian front. For these 10 years, they understand how to behave in this situation. Of course, they draw conclusions and start taking example from their closest partner, Azerbaijan. And it's not a random observation. It has become a tradition. The prime ministers of Georgia and the president of Georgia always start making their visit. After they come to power, the first thing they do is visit Azerbaijan. This is also a stance because today we are moving in tandem. I really hope that this understanding that this liberal ideology which led to all these crimes in the post-Soviet space and no one stood up for us, this understanding will come to Moldova, and sooner or later it will come to Ukraine as well, because otherwise I don't think anyone will succeed in restoring the sovereignty of territorial integrity. Therefore, you need to find your own Turkey, your own Israel, your own Pakistan, and for Moldova and for Ukraine and for Georgia as well, because as you can see, they are not planning to stand up for you. And the same Donald Trump, who today is a representative of this right-wing ideology, they also don't seem to be planning to do this, as you notice. But he says, make America great again. Today, he is not interested in the Azerbaijani-Armenian issue, nor is he interested in the Russian-Ukrainian issue. He's even ready to confront his allies from the European Union and NATO. And his allies in the European Union and NATO, they find themselves today in such a state of disarray and uncertainty that they don't even know how to react today. And they understand, on one hand, the fear of what might happen to them if Ukraine falls in this situation. And so they are starting to create a club of willing participants in a firefighting manner and everything else. And in this situation, of course, you can skillfully play your game, understanding that you have a real army, you are a real buffer between Russia and Europe. According to Bob, if you capitulate, it means the European Union and NATO also capitulate in this situation. And that's why they are actively moving in the direction you need. But they might not be moving at the speed you need because they have money. But over all these years, under the umbrella of the United States of America, their military-industrial complex is not at that level today. They don't have the same amount of weapons. These weapons are in the United States of America, and they are also somewhere else on this planet. But for it to work at a level where they could manage without the United States, it will certainly take several years, at least 2 to 3 years. It's better to ask the specialists who work in this field about it, but at least 2-3 years are needed for this. This means the war could continue all this time, or there should be a freeze in the conflict. But again, a freeze in the conflict with such security guarantees that during this time Russia would not be able to advance. And this, like the Budapest Memorandum, it doesn't work. So there must be real military forces standing at the border who will do this today. Look at the map and draw conclusions in this geography. And in the same Europe, the real army is the Turkish army, the real army is the Ukrainian army. Yes, the British and the French also have a certain number of soldiers who can participate there, but for this, political will is needed. For this, certain support measures from the United States of America are also needed. Therefore, all these processes today, they are happening in real time. And simply, why am I explaining this to you in such detail? This was everything that happened today in the corridors of this conference, and I felt it was my duty to share it with you as well. So once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk, dear Igor. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Once again, Mr. Yosef, thank you very much for explaining in detail what is being discussed, not only at such premium meetings like in Paris, in the United States of America, in Ukraine, as well as representatives of the European Union, but also other conferences that are not widely covered by us, yet they are also very important. And thank you very much for that. Goodbye.